This story, titled Living in His Shadow, begins with a man named Ben, 42 years old, living in a modest suburban home in Denver, Colorado. Ben had always been a quiet man. He didn't care much for the spotlight, preferring to spend his days working diligently as a mechanical engineer and his evenings tending to the small vegetable garden in the backyard. He loved the simplicity of his life, but more than that, he loved his wife, Claire. They'd been married for 6 years. And to Ben, she was his everything. Claire was vibrant, intelligent, and driven. She worked as a marketing executive for a major company, constantly chasing the next big promotion, the next accolade. Ben admired her ambition, though it sometimes made him feel like he was standing still while she was running ahead. But he'd always believed that love wasn't about keeping score. That belief started to waver about a year ago, when Claire began talking more and more about her ex, Greg. Greg was everything Ben wasn't. An entrepreneur who built a tech company from the ground up, traveled the world for business, and was constantly featured in glossy magazines. At first, Claire's mentions of Greg were casual, stories from her past, anecdotes she thought were funny or insightful. But over time, the tone shifted. I remember when Greg and I went to Italy. He was so spontaneous. He just booked the tickets and said, "Let's go." Or, Greg always used to say that you can't succeed if you're afraid to take risks. And then, one evening over dinner, Greg would have never settled for a middle management position. He always aimed higher. The words stung. Ben didn't say anything at first, unsure how to respond without sounding defensive or insecure. But as the weeks turned into months, Claire's comparisons to Greg became more frequent and more cutting. One night, as they were sitting on the couch, Claire offhandedly remarked, "Sometimes I just wish you had more ambition, you know? Greg was always so driven, so inspiring." Ben felt his chest tighten. He looked at her, hoping to find some sign that she didn't mean what she said. But Claire was scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the impact of her words. That night, Ben lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in their marriage, he felt like he wasn't enough. The comparisons didn't stop. When Ben suggested they spend a quiet weekend at home, Claire rolled her eyes and said, Greg would have planned something exciting, something adventurous. When Ben brought home a small raise from work, Claire barely acknowledged it, saying instead, "Greg's company grew by 200% in 1 year. Can you imagine?" It wasn't just the words. It was the way Claire said them. As if she genuinely believed Greg was a better man than Ben could ever be. The resentment began to build. Ben started to dread conversations with Claire, anticipating the inevitable mention of Greg's name. He became withdrawn, spending more time in the garage, tinkering with projects, or taking long walks alone. He couldn't bring himself to confront her, fearing that she'd dismiss his feelings, or worse, confirm his deepest fear, that she regretted marrying him. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, Ben came home to find Claire on the phone. "Yeah, Greg always knew how to handle tough situations," she was saying, her voice light and cheerful. He was a natural leader. Some people just have that spark, you know?" Ben felt something inside him snap. "Claire," he said sharply, his voice startling her. She turned, her eyes wide. "What's wrong? I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice shaking. "I can't keep listening to you compare me to Greg like I'm some kind of placeholder. Do you even realize how hurtful it is? How small it makes me feel?" Claire frowned, clearly caught off guard. "Ben, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," he interrupted. "You keep holding him up as this perfect example of what a man should be, and I'm just supposed to sit here and take it? I've spent years loving you, supporting you, being there for you. Is that not enough for you?" Claire stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Ben thought she might apologize, might finally see how much her words had hurt him. But instead, she said softly, "I didn't realize you were so insecure." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Insecure?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You think this is about insecurity? This is about respect, Claire, about valuing the person you chose to spend your life with. But maybe that's the problem. You didn't really choose me, did you?" "I was just the safe option, the stable guy who wouldn't challenge you the way Greg did." "And that's not fair," Claire said, her tone defensive. "Isn't it?" he shot back. "Because it sure feels like I'm competing with a ghost. And honestly, Claire, I'm starting to think I'll never win." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should take some time apart." Ben felt his heart drop. "What?" "I think we need space," she said, avoiding his gaze, "to figure out what we really want." The days following Claire's suggestion for a break were some of the loneliest of Ben's life. He moved out temporarily, renting a small apartment across town. It was nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with old carpets and creaky windows, but it gave him space to think. He spent his evenings sitting by the window, staring out at the city lights and replaying the argument in his head. Was Claire right? Was he too insecure? Or was this distance proof that he'd always been second best in her eyes? One weekend, Ben decided to clear his head by visiting an old friend, Mark, who lived about an hour away. Mark had always been the voice of reason in Ben's life, a no-nonsense kind of guy who didn't sugarcoat things. Over coffee, Ben opened up about everything. "She just keeps comparing me to him," Ben said, shaking his head. "And now she wants space. I don't know if I should fight for this or just let her go." Mark leaned back in his chair, considering Ben's words. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Do you feel like you've been yourself in this relationship? Or have you been bending over backward, trying to prove you're good enough for her?" The question hit Ben hard. He realized he had been trying to measure up, not because he wanted to change, but because he felt like he had to. "That's not love, man," Mark continued. "Love isn't about comparisons or making someone feel like they're not enough. You deserve better than that." That night, Ben thought long and hard about Mark's words. For years, he had tried to be the supportive, steady husband Claire needed. But somewhere along the way, he had lost himself in the process. A few days later, Claire called. "Can we meet?" she asked, her voice hesitant. They decided to meet at a quiet park where they used to go when they first started dating. It was a sunny afternoon, the kind of day that used to make Ben feel hopeful. When Claire arrived, she looked nervous. She sat down on the bench beside him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, "and I realize now that I've been unfair to you. Comparing you to Greg wasn't just hurtful. It was wrong. You're not him, and you shouldn't have to be. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough." Ben felt a flicker of hope, but also a deep sense of caution. "Why did you do it, Claire?" he asked. "Why did you keep bringing him up?" She hesitated, then sighed. I think part of me never really let go of the life I had with Greg. It wasn't about you, Ben. It was about me holding on to something I should have moved on from a long time ago. And that's not fair to you." Ben appreciated her honesty, but he also knew it wasn't that simple. "So what now?" he asked. Claire looked down at her hands. "I want to make this work," she said. "I want to let go of the past and focus on us. But I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight." Ben took a deep breath. He could see that she was trying, but the wounds were still fresh. "I need time too, Claire," he said. "Time to figure out if I can trust you again, not just to be honest with me, but to respect me for who I am." They agreed to take things slow, to rebuild their relationship piece by piece. But as the weeks went by, Ben started to notice something. Claire was trying. She stopped mentioning Greg, started appreciating the little things Ben did, and made an effort to show she valued him. Yet, deep down, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Claire turned to him and said, "Do you think we'll ever get back to the way we were?" Ben looked at her, his heart heavy. "I don't know," he admitted. "I think we've both changed. The question is whether those changes bring us closer or push us further apart." Claire nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I just want you to know that I love you, Ben. I always have." And in that moment, Ben realized something important. Love wasn't enough, not by itself. It had to be paired with respect, understanding, and the willingness to let go of the past. As they continued to navigate their relationship, Ben remained hopeful, but cautious. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he deserved a love that didn't make him feel like he was living in someone else's shadow. If this story resonates with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let's talk about love, respect, and what it really means to move forward in a relationship.